Alright everyone, it's time for us to keep going with the journey of a lifetime. It looks like we're close to the end, and chapter 19 will be the one where we learn the young Vixen's secret. Alright, let's read. While the previous week for Plucky had been a mixture of hardship, misery, and at points, pleasure, it was just as worse for the rest of the group. After escaping from the bank and climbing out the opposite river's bank, Scarlet was in a state of distress. She had witnessed her one brother's possible brutal murder from the same older brother who had wounded her and her brave falcon friend. Once safe the other side of the river, Perry had passed out on her back. The injuries to his wing were significant, and he may not be able to fly for a long time. So naturally, he too was full of depression. Dash, Bolt, Woody, and Jester were quick to help and comfort them, having witnessed full of nerve the scuffle from the other side. They insisted Scarlet should rest like Perry already had. However, she was still too tense to agree, and insisted herself they should keep moving, lest her brothers, or even worse, the Grey Foxes came after them again. They kept moving, but not before drinking from the same river. They continued to cross wild scrubland until the sun had disappeared below the horizon. Scarlet was in a bad way. Most particular was the wound on her neck, where her older brother had clamped his powerful jaws on it. It still bled gradually. She stubbornly staggered along behind the group, still carrying the unconscious Perry. She couldn't stop thinking of Plucky. Where was he? Was he safe? She hoped to the heavens that he was, despite how pessimistic she currently felt. Suddenly, her legs buckled, and she collapsed in the open, much to the worry of her companions. "Scarlet! Oh dear! Come on, you must get up!" Dash pleaded with her. Scarlet's breathing was heavy and fast. The hunger and thirst she felt, coupled with the pain and blood loss, had reduced her strength to a nonentity. "I can't. I have to rest." "Well, at least just a little further," Bolt interjected. "It's too exposed out here." Scarlet couldn't deny this. Who knows what will be venturing this land, day or night. She found an ounce more of strength and stood shakily on her legs. "Lead the way," she panted. Bolt went off ahead to lead them all to the cover of a copse, not but a little distance away. Dash and the squirrel stayed close to the suffering Vixen and stricken falcon. When they reached the copse, Scarlet collapsed again, this time intending not to move until she had rested. Perry too had rumbled from his slumber, only again to fall asleep in a heap next to the Vixen. Dash, Bolt, Woody, and Jester knew they would have to forage for them. Each of them had never had to do such a thing for a predator. It's not like they could go catch live prey, and it's not like there was anywhere they could find anything that once was. This was a problem. Perry, as a falcon, was solely a meat-eater, but Scarlet was a fox, and she could eat certain fruits, roots, insects, and grasses. Nevertheless, their friends were in great need. They thought of a plan. Dash and Bolt would go searching for food for Scarlet and Perry, the more difficult task, while Woody and Jester would go foraging for themselves and the two hares. They did this for most of the night, thankfully without any problems. Scarlet and Perry, though, had to rest. Both had suffered a great ordeal. Perry had already drifted, but Scarlet was full of sorrow, for her mate Plucky, and for her brother Rebel. That night she silently cried herself to sleep. The next morning, Scarlet woke first. She was pleasantly pleased when she found several assorted morsels of food next to her. Dash and Bolt had certainly been busy. There were many berries of sorts, several root vegetables, and to her astonishment, an untouched carcass of a wood pigeon. How on earth had a couple of hares caught that? Unselfishly, she left the dead bird for Perry to eat, and she took the choice of the rest. When the others woke, Perry immediately tucked into the wood pigeon, and the two hares explained the assorted foods. Apparently they got lucky last night and found the bird already dead, possibly stricken by another bird of prey, but not taken for sustenance. The fruits and roots were easy to find, and Woody and Jester hadn't strained themselves in finding any for the herbivores. They themselves had feasted on acorns all through the night, and Dash and Bolt had eaten from some of the assorted grasses around. Scarlet and Perry thanked them most graciously for their kindness. They really were more family than friends. But of course, someone was missing. The lack of Plucky's presence dimmed all their moods, particularly Scarlet's. But they all knew Plucky would want them to go on without him. After the day had passed for the group to rest, the sun started to set. They were in conversation, which soon steered to how they would fend for themselves. While Scarlet was ambulatory again, she was not to her fullest extent. She could go hunting for herself, but with great difficulty. But she would have to go for Perry too. With his wing out of action, he was grounded for now, and therefore not able to hunt. It put Perry in a bad mood. He felt just as helpless as he did before he met his friends. A flightless falcon. What were they going to do? Woody soon injected. "We did see a town in the distance last night, from atop the trees," he mentioned. "The same town that Perry and Robber are going to." "Maybe, but yes, it might, maybe, yeah. Yes, it is." Jessamine spoke, hinting at an idea. "It wasn't too far, either." Bolt sighed and spoke shortly after. "As much as I don't want to go back to an urban environment, which I'm sure the rest of us don't want to either, it'll be easier to scavenge for food there, for you both, than out here." "It will be. I'm in no state to go hunting, nor is Perry," Scarlet said feebly, as Perry weakly nodded silently. "Also, if those other foxes come after me again, they wouldn't risk entering the town." "And if we stay there for a while, it will give you both some time to recover. And for Plucky to find us." Dash 2 saw the logic of the idea. "It's settled then, I think. We'll head for the town," Bolt announced. "Woody, Jester, lead the way." Woody and Jester were quite overjoyed for their first great act of responsibility. Over the now darkened scrubland they led in front, as Bolt and Dash took it in turns to be behind the squirrels and behind Scarlet, to make sure they were keeping up, and Woody and Jester didn't go too far ahead. Perry still rolled on Scarlet's back. This was the night the frost came, so when the group reached the outskirts of the town, they briefly went scavenging, but decided against doing it for a long time. The night grew colder, and the group huddled together for warmth. They were soon asleep underneath the undergrowth of a patch of oak trees the far side of a garden fence, except Dash and Bolt, and unknown to them, Scarlet too was unable to sleep. She missed Plucky, his warmth and his loving embrace she had now been so accustomed to. She wondered too how he was feeling right now. If he was still alive. She could overhear Dash and Bolt talking, but kept her sleeplessness secret. At least she wasn't alone. "You know, I don't think it's fully spring yet," Dash said quietly to her mate. "It's the turn of the season. Weather gets weird," Bolt explained humorously. "Apparently so," Dash said, her mood obviously bleak. "You miss Plucky, don't you?" Bolt asked warmly. "Yes. He is my best friend. But I know he's okay," Dash replied with hope in her voice. "This isn't the first time he's been on his own, and he always finds his way eventually. I always have hope, no matter how serious the situation." As Scarlet overheard this, her heart warmed. Often she forgot how such close friends Plucky and Dash were. It enticed a sort of jealousy in her, something which she had already talked to Bolt about. He too felt the same sometimes, but they both let these feelings pass. They were foolish to get jealous over such a thing. However, she knew as long as Dash should hope, she should too, and with that knowledge the Vixen went to sleep. Bolt and Dash continued to talk. "It's very admirable of you, Dash, that you should have such hope," Bolt said tenderly. "Most of us wouldn't have such a trait. It's one of the reasons I love you." Dash said nothing. She only nuzzled the male hair with affection. "We should sleep too. We should sleep soon," she said with a yawn. "Though it's such a blissful night, even if it is cold out." "I agree. On both of those," Bolt chuckled. The hare couple soon fell asleep together, in amongst their already sleeping companions. That night, as she slept, the small glimmer of hope Scarlet had was brutally extinguished after experiencing a nightmare. She saw, as if through a clouded mist, the bruised and bloody dead body of a red fox sprawled on the ground, blood flowing and pooling on the bare stone the corpse lay on. She didn't want to go closer to it, but she had no control of her motions. Her heart almost stopped when she saw who it was. The rusty red fur and black ears were immediately recognizable. It was Plucky. Scarlet screamed. She woke with a start. Her heart was pounding, and her breath fast, only for her to then break down in tears. She was quiet, so as not to wake the others. It couldn't be true. It just couldn't be. Plucky had promised her he would see her again. She would know it if he was dead. She was starting to think deeply, wondering if instead of seeing the past or present, she was seeing into the future, as if it was a premonition. She didn't want to go back to sleep after that. The image haunted her mind, the image of the love of her life dead before her eyes. She laid her head down on her paws and stared out of the undergrowth, trying to not particularly think about anything. A couple of days passed, and luckily, Scarlet's nightmare hadn't repeated itself. Mentally, she still felt terrible, and it clearly showed in her mood. She was becoming very pessimistic. The frost had now thawed, and soon it was warmer again. The sun shone in the day, but the group did not venture, and only slept, even through the manic human activity inside the town and the immense noises it produced. Having been in the middle of a great big city for almost a month recently, the animals were used to these noises, and so easily slept on through them. During the night they ventured into the town. Carefully they progressed and kept close together. Over the couple of days, Scarlet recovered more from her injuries and was able to roam freely again. Perry too felt better. Although his wings still kept him grounded, he was not fully grounded. He could do his hop and hover technique again, which acted as a therapeutic without causing too much strain. Now that Scarlet and Perry could fend for themselves again, Dash and Bolt went back to foraging for themselves, and Woody and Jester too fended for themselves. However, it was not uncommon they would all pool their findings and share as they returned to their makeshift shelter. Over the next few days, though, Scarlet's physical condition slowly deteriorated. The first day, she woke up feeling queasy, but kept it to herself as it wasn't serious. The second day, it was more serious, enough for the others to notice. The Vixen was releasing small wheezes of anguish every now and then. But when the others asked Scarlet, That natural, resilient, tough personality she had assured them she was fine. However, she couldn't hide it the next day. When she awoke, she was so nauseated she could barely stand without falling over again. She could only walk a few meters to the nearest smallest puddle to drink from. Naturally, the group were worried. But Scarlet knew what it was. She was sure now. The young Vixen's secret. Could it be? The group left her to rest while they went scavenging, and on their return gave her food. But she shrugged off any other help. When the next day came, she was even worse. The rest of the group were abruptly awakened by the sound of the Vixen throwing up, several times over. With regards to her friends, she had moved away from the tiny hovel they were currently residing in. But this time the group had had enough of her stubbornness, and demanded that Scarlet let them help her. But Scarlet's stubbornness could not be broken, especially when she had growled at them to leave her alone, and insisted again that she was okay, so long as they brought her food. That night, Dash stayed with her for company and moral support, and unknowingly to Scarlet, to pry and question her into what was making her ill. Dash could tell Scarlet was not worried that she was unwell, which she could only assume that Scarlet knew what was causing it. While Scarlet lay on her side, her eyes closed and her breathing steady, Dash lied opposite her and watched. There was almost a frown on her face. She was annoyed that Scarlet, her friend, was being so stubborn and not accept their help. It wasn't how she was taught to live her life. Dash decided to go steadily into it. When Scarlet opened her eyes again, she asked, "How are you feeling?" "Not great, but don't worry about me," Scarlet replied calmly. "Scarlet, you know I can't help but worry," Dash said with anxiety, trying to induce some sympathy from the Vixen. "And I'm telling you not to," Scarlet muttered. "But you won't get better without any help. To do so, we need to know what's wrong with you." "As long as you bring me food, I'll be fine," Scarlet continued. "Scarlet, you need help!" Dash interrupted forcefully, now sitting up. "No, I don't. I need rest and—" Scarlet began, a little startled by Dash's assertive outburst, before she was interrupted again. "But you're not well!" Dash exclaimed. "Scarlet, please just tell me what's wrong so I can help you." "Dash, it's nothing you can help me with," Scarlet replied cogently. "It's my problem, and I shall deal with it in my own way." "I know that you know what's making you ill," the hare asserted, but then turned to a desperate plea. "If you won't accept our help, then at least just tell me. Please." Dash pleaded sadly, letting her ears droop, in a small attempt to guilt Scarlet into telling her. It worked too, as Scarlet stared at her. The Vixen sighed. "It's, Scarlet began uncomfortably. "Dash." She sighed again before she broke the news to the hare. "I think I'm pregnant." Dash was speechless. Her eyes widened, and her ears perked back up in surprise. Now she felt guilty that she had forced Scarlet into telling her what was probably her biggest secret. "Does Plucky know—" Dash began with a stutter. "No. I never had the chance to tell him before we were separated," Scarlet stated sadly. She then almost burst into tears. "Oh, I do hope he's okay." Dash stood and came over to her to hug and comfort the Vixen. "Don't despair, Scarlet. I'm sure he's on his way back to us as fast as possible. I hope so, Scarlet sobbed. But the nightmare she had experienced told her otherwise. But it's been days, almost a week. What if he is... Don't say it! You and I both know that he's perfectly safe. Otherwise we know it. How can you be so certain? Because I just am. Dash comforted her. Plucky's been my friend for longer than I can remember. In fact, he's more like a brother to me. And I his sister. We've been like that ever since he first opened his eyes as a cub. And I took my first steps as a leveret. If he was hurt, I would feel it, in here. Dash pointed her chest. As I'm sure you would too. Scarlet sighed. I wish I could have your optimism, Dash. She still openly wept. I really do. I'd only like to hope, but I can't. I can't do this alone. Not anymore. Look at me. Dash held Scarlet's muzzle to face her. You don't have to do it alone. You aren't alone anymore. You have Plucky, and you have us. We will always be there for you, whenever you need us. And even when you don't know you need us, we will be there. Scarlet looked at her tenderly with tears in her eyes, before speaking quietly. Thank you. Remember, me and Bolt, Perry, and even Woody and Jester. We are as much a family to you as Plucky and your unborn cubs are. Dash smiled, before letting go of her and backing off slightly. And I shall always remember it. Scarlet smiled back. Now she had stopped crying. Thank you, Dash. You really are a good friend. Plucky is lucky to have you. He's lucky to have you too, Dash enlightened her. I'm sure he must have told you already that he was enamored with you from the moment he first laid eyes on you. Yes, he had said that, Scarlet replied with a small smile of joy. I'd never seen him so love-struck before, Dash laughed, making Scarlet smile again. I'm so lucky to have him too. He's done so much for me already. He wouldn't let anything happen to you, Dash smiled. Scarlet would have replied back, but she soon thought. Plucky would never let anything happen to her. What would happen to him then? That's what her nightmare was about. She feared, now especially that she was with cubs, that he may do something overly reckless and selfless to save her, something that would cost him his life. How did she know he hadn't already done that? Dash had noticed her mind had wandered, so tried to move the conversation on. So then, you and Plucky already... Dash began to pry a little awkwardly. She was of course still surprised of Scarlet's news. Don't sound so surprised, Dash, Scarlet interrupted, and then spoke as if giving her a lesson. It is mating season after all, and I'm sure you and Bolt will do the same too. The Vixen finished with a sly smile. Well, yes, Dash said almost excitedly. But it's not her mating season yet. That's much further into the spring. Oh, yes, of course. Though you will have to tell Plucky when we see him again, Dash instructed. Well, obviously, Scarlet agreed. Though she soon turned her head away as she tried to get comfortable to go to sleep. Despite all the positives Dash had just given her, she was still pessimistic about Plucky's return to them. She mumbled to herself, so Dash couldn't hear her. If we see him again. Then she went off to sleep. Dash stayed awake a moment before leaving the Vixen to rest. Then she went to join the others in the town. She felt quite privileged Scarlet had told her, though of course she had been asking forcefully. There was no intention to tell the others what was Scarlet's business. It was not her news to tell, so she kept her mouth shut, but was excited and happy for Scarlet and of course Plucky too. Eventually, in an overground back alley, She found Bolt tearing out some plants from their roots, intending to take them back to their shelter. Dash watched him for a moment, thinking of their future together. It caused her own mind to wonder, thinking, she was so happy with him, and he with her. She soon approached the male hare, but not very quietly. Bolt was soon immediately alerted to her presence. "Hey, you seem in a good mood," he asked affectionately. "Yeah, because I found you," Dash returned a loving smile. "Flatterer," Bolt laughed and returned the smile. "Is Scarlet sleeping now?" "Yes, she is." "Probably what's best for her. Did you find out what was wrong with her, though?" Bolt questioned. Dash was unsure what to say, making her pause for a while. Bolt was her mate. Maybe she could tell him. No. Even how important he was to her, she would not betray Scarlet's trust in her. It wasn't her news to tell. She was forced to lie to her mate. "No, she's still as stubborn as ever," she announced, but continued in a poignant tone. "But she's upset, Bold. She misses Plucky so much." "I can imagine." Bolt looked down, but tried to be optimistic. "But she has our company until he returns." "You believe he will?" "Of course. He's a brave fox. No wonder his name is Plucky," Bolt said energetically. "Yes, he is," Dash replied with a smile. She noticed, though, that Bolt was being overly optimistic than he usually was. "You've certainly changed your tone." "Well, I think some of your hope has rubbed off on me," Bolt smiled, and then nuzzled Dash, who accepted it lovingly. "You and Plucky have been an inspiration to all of us." Dash and Bolt engaged in a loving embrace for some time. His form was a warm blanket that engulfed her, while she was a searing fire that reached him to his very core. The gold necklace she wore shimmered in the moonlight. Dash had almost completely forgotten that she was wearing it, a token of Bolt's love for her. She was so happy, and couldn't wait to have her own family with him. They were abruptly interrupted when a falcon landed flat on his front a meter away from them. Perry was still trying to fly again, but the strain on his injured wing was too great, and clearly he had fallen out of the sky, though not from a great height at least. He released a small whistle of annoyance from his beak, then realized he wasn't alone. Bolt greeted him. "You always have a knack for interrupting our romantic moments, Perry," Bolt said humorously. "Sorry, I don't do it on purpose," Perry replied innocently, picking himself off the floor. "No matter. We were just about to go searching for you lot anyway." "How's your wing?" Dash asked kindly. Mending. Still hurts, though. I hate being grounded. I feel so helpless," Perry huffed, obviously in a blend of frustration and depression. "Don't worry. It'll mend soon and then you can fly again," Dash reassured the young falcon. "I hope so. I'm just glad that Fox didn't bite any harder. Could have broken my wing. Then I would never fly again." "Well, that didn't happen, and we saw you. You were so brave," Dash consoled him. "Very brave. You should be proud of yourself," Bolt praised. "I am. I'd have never considered doing such a thing before I met you guys," Perry said shyly with a smile. Suddenly, the two hares and the falcon's attention were diverted from their conversation when several acorns fell on the ground before them. They looked up, and from atop a brick wall, Woody and Jester were both there, watching them. "There you go," Woody said cheerily. Not wanting to disappoint you guys," Bolt said to them after picking up one of the acorns and looking at it weirdly. "But hares don't eat acorns." "Or falcons and foxes," Perry added on. "Huh?" Both squirrels admitted, and then Woody continued. "Oh, no. Those are just to get your attention." Yeah, can't get a word in with you lot, Jester chuckled. Do you have something to tell us then? Dash asked warmly. Yeah, we found food for all of us tonight. And the next few nights if we're lucky, Jester beamed. Follow us! Turns out the two mischievous squirrels had found their way into the storage room of a small local shop, through a partially open window. They claimed there were all kinds of food in there, to each of their tastes. After reaching it, there was a dilemma though. Only Woody and Jester could get in, as they had climbed up the wall and squeezed through the window, so they had to come up with another way to get to the food inside. There was a door to the storeroom from the outside, but was obviously locked. That was going to be the only way. However, when the squirrels entered the room again, they found the key still in the door. And with one small, though difficult twist, it clicked and unlocked. Dash and Bolt pushed the door lightly. That wasn't going to be enough, so they pushed harder, and it moved freely, with enough room for them to enter. The group had a field day in that storage room. Each of them grabbed their fill, and of course, grabbed something for Scarlet too. Although they were knowingly committing larceny, they were careful about it and didn't leave the place ransacked. They couldn't afford to if they intended to come back the next night. After giving Woody and Jester the credit they deserved, the group of animals soon left, closing and relocking the door behind them, and returning to their makeshift shelter before the sun arose. Scarlet had woken when they returned, and was shocked when she saw Bolt dragging a whole lamb's leg behind him. This chapter now has two names for its MVPs. Woody and Jester. The Squirrel Twins are amazing. That was me chugging down the rest of my tea. Where on earth did you find that? Scarlet lifted her head in surprise. You can thank Woody and Jester, actually. They found a food store we can raid every night, Bolt answered her. Credit where credit's due, I see, Scarlet said warmly, before looking to the two squirrels. Nice work, you two, and thanks, she finished with a smile, and soon tucked into her food. Does this, make up for the whole firework fiasco? Dresser inquired nervously. It was ultimately his idea, so he was the one to ask. To be honest, I think we all forgot about that, Dash replied calmly as she lay down. But yes, I think it does. I agree, Bolt said with a long yawn. Well, I think it's time for sleep then, Dash said to him jokingly. This was the first time she had the chance to be the one who joked about the other's tiredness. Of course, Bolt conceded with a laugh, as did the rest of the group. Scarlet smiled as she listened to their friendly banter, but soon they were all asleep. After such a hearty meal, she felt much better, physically. Mentally, she was still in a state of worry for Plucky. She was glad to have such a group of friends, but it wasn't the same without him there. Scarlet felt better the next day. She still felt queasy, but was ultimately over her morning sickness. But the group insisted she stay resting unless it crept up on her again. Unfortunately, the animals' luck had run out after the third night of raiding the food store. It was obvious the human who owned it had now realized the animal thieves. The window had been closed, and the door was now double padlocked from the inside. It was good while it lasted, but now they would have to scavenge again. The following night, Scarlet insisted that she was okay to go foraging with the others, but also stated she would go further into the town than they had. As a bigger and more intimidating animal, she could cover much more ground in much less time, without fear of some of the dangers the others would. There was an ominous rumble in the distance, a rumble of thunder. A storm was coming. Regardless, the group of animals ventured into the night-engulfed town. Scarlet went deeper into it, reaching the town's center. Vigilantly and anxiously, she roamed the empty roads and pavements bathed in an artificial orange glow, going bin to bin. She went past shops and houses, even a high walled-off churchyard, but was uneasy to go down alleyways. Considering the last time she was in a small country town, she had found herself in a fox trap, Plucky with her. She quickly thought about that night. It felt like an entire era ago, almost 6 months now. A time before she and Plucky were mates. A time before she knew she could love another. A time before he even knew her real name. A time before he wore his scars. Once again, she fell into her pit of despair, wondering and worrying about him. This was the 10th night since Plucky had been separated from her, from all of them. Despite that, Scarlet had been alone most of her life, and now was surrounded by others who loved her. She never felt more alone. But this was to be the last night of her life she ever would be. Everyone, tune into the next chapter, and everyone, the next chapter is coming, and I hope you'll tune in for it. Until then, I'm the Masked Ranger saying keep moving forward, remember the oath, and thank your lucky stars.